Welcome back, everyone, to the Pocketables Weekly News Roundup for, I don't know what date this will actually go live, so we'll just say the first week of August. And we've got a couple of different things going on. Some of them are bigger than others, and some of them are just kind of underwhelming. But let's go ahead and start with the simple one. Google is trialing a YouTube Premium Lite service in parts of Europe, which is terrible naming. Premium Lite just doesn't roll off the tongue. They could have just called it Plus and left Premium above that pretty easily or something else. But anyway, the service itself is pretty straightforward. €6.99 a month as opposed to the €11.99 a month gets you YouTube with no ads. That's it. End of the story. No YouTube music, no background play, no other bonuses on top of that. It's just YouTube sans ads. And I understand why this is a trial. So there's no technical reason this is a trial. Simply put, if they were already doing these things in YouTube Premium, there's no reason to think that they'd have any issue doing them in YouTube Premium Lite. But what I think they're looking at is this is a market trial. They want to see how many people opt for this service, because what Google doesn't want to happen is they don't want to lose premium users who are paying more to this Premium Lite service. So they don't want to see their premium user count go down in a number that is equal to the increase in Premium Lite users. Now, whether or not that ends up working out for them remains to be seen, and we'll see if the service rolls out to the rest of the world in the meantime. Other Google news this week. Lots of leaked details on the new Pixel 6 devices. Key amongst them is that there's going to be two. We've got a 6 and a 6 Plus at 6.4 and 6.7 inches. Basically, the way it's going to break down is the Plus is going to get a better camera with telescopic zoom. It's going to get probably more storage and RAM, although that's not confirmed at this point. It is going to get a better screen. It's looking to be QHD Plus instead of FHD Plus with a 120 Hz refresh rate versus a 90 Hz refresh rate. So anybody who likes smaller phones is just kind of left out in the cold there on a lot of the bells and whistles. The real key feature of note on the new Pixel phones is going to be Google's new Tensor Soc, which hopefully that name doesn't end up coming back to bite them, but it looks to be a collaboration with Samsung LSI, so this is going to use Exynos CPU cores and potentially the same GPU that a Exynos chip would use alongside Google designed silicon. Now, none of this is new. Exynos is hopefully not, but potentially a known quantity. We've had Exynos CPUs available for lots of smartphones for a while. Google's AI engine has been in previous Pixel devices, so we know what it does. It's just moving directly into the SoC now. And hopefully this move doesn't come back to negatively impact Pixel devices. And what I mean by that is, traditionally, if you released two phones, one with a Qualcomm-derived CPU and one with a Exynos-derived CPU from Samsung in the same generation, the advantage tended to go to the Qualcomm chip. Not to say that it was always that way across the board, not to say that there weren't phones with Exynos chips that were better due to better design, better software, take your pick. But as a rule, and Samsung's an excellent example of this, if I took two phones, we'll say the S20 and we'll just say the Samsung S20, I release one with a Exynos chip, I release one with a Qualcomm chip. The one with the Qualcomm chip is going to tend to be the better received and reviewed phone. And that's just kind of the market direction that things have been heading in a while. Now, this is a new generation Exynos chipset. This will be up against new generation Snapdragons. Yeah, I guess they're still Snapdragons. So where this will play out is anybody's guess, but I really hope this doesn't leave the Pixel devices, which are supposed to be full-blown premium devices, not cutting any corners this particular generation, behind on the CPU component because they wanted better integration. Speaking of phones, this is one I'm potentially going to be impacted by. T-Mobile is looking to sunset Sprint's legacy networks with a cutoff date of, I believe it's January for the 3G network. Let me just double check actually. Yeah, with a cut-up date of January 2022 for the 3G network and June 2022 for their 4G LTE bands. Now, service will continue to exist in these frequencies. What's happening is T-Mobile is repurposing it so that they have a less, what's the word I want to use here? Less diverse way of talking to devices. They're going to be using some of these frequency bands for improving their own LTE coverage on their existing network with existing devices. They're going to be repurposing some of this for various 5G technologies. So these are good things, but as of today, roughly 20% of their customers are still using these services. They're estimating by June 2022 that number is going to be something in the order of 3%. Customers who are going to be impacted are supposed to be notified. I haven't been notified yet, although I know my device no longer gets 5G service thanks to the merger, my OnePlus 7 Pro 5G. And I'm not particularly enthused at the list of devices that are available from T-Mobile should I choose to upgrade. I don't want a lot, folks. I don't want a hole cut in my screen. I would love to get my micro SD card and my headphone jack back. But I also don't want some bottom of the barrel device. I would like a proper flagship that still has all the flagship things included. So if anyone has a suggestion on that that might still be compatible with T-Mobile's network, leave me a note in the comments below. And T-Mobile, if you're watching this, get some real flagships back. Stop just selling us the same phones that are losing more features than they're gaining. Moving on to a more technical bit of news, we have the 12.0 U5 update for Trunas being released. And if you're not familiar with Trunas, that's okay. Eventually, we will actually get to building a Trunas system, maybe with the little Byte 4. I don't know how it'll handle that. Trunas is a project that is similar to pfSense in that there's a free and there's a commercial component to it, which has been a bit of contention since Trunas was originally built on top of FreeNAS, which is being sunset. But I'm not particularly bothered by there being a commercial component as long as they don't start charging for things that were previously available for free. That's just kind of the way a lot of these open source projects work. And I'll use Ubuntu as a good example. I can use Ubuntu all day for free, as it is. However, if I want phone support, I have to pay Canonical for that support. If I want to use some of Ubuntu's cloud management or multi-device management features, I have to buy a license for those. So the whole TrueNAS versus FreeNAS, paid versus free dichotomy is not something that we're going to dig into today. Needless to say that there is an update for TrueNAS, and it appears to be improving some of the features. Some web UI bugs are being fixed. There's some updates to the ZFS implementation, and there'll be a link to the Serve the Home article on it in the description below. Next item up, another PC item. Crucial released their new P5 Plus NVMe, which is actually a bit bigger of a deal than the name would suggest. The name, unfortunately, simply implies an updated version of the P5. Could be newer NAND generation, could be a controller update, could be better SLC cache, with the same controller. Take your pick, but it doesn't imply what the reality is, which is a whole new SSD. The P5 Plus is Crucial's first shipping consumer Gen 4 SSD. And honestly, that's more exciting than it sounds. It's also oddly timed. And we'll talk about both of those. So, on the exciting part, Gen 4 SSDs have been shipping for a while. But for the most part, you had a couple of different ways of implementing them. You had Phison, I want to say it's the E18, and Silicon Motion's controller, which I want to say is the 2264, but don't quote me on that. So a lot of vendors, and there's nothing wrong with this, Mushkin, Gigabyte, and AData will say, I want to launch a Gen 4 SSD. They go to a controller vendor and say, I want the controllers, and I want this firmware with this feature set. And the vendor would then deliver the controllers, and they would be given a reference implementation of the SSD that they could use or make changes to as they saw fit. Psion's a little different than that compared to Silicon Motion, and that Silicon Motion will tell you how to implement it, but they won't sell you a PCB. Phison will basically just sell you an SSD and say, slap your name on the label, off you go. And there's nothing wrong with that. Um, those are both valid ways of doing it. But some vendors, particularly vendors with flash fabs, have been known to go a step further. So Samsung is probably the poster child for this approach. All of Samsung's SSDs use Samsung designed controllers. Be it the 800 series drives on SATA or the 900 series drives on PCIe or their enterprise drives, they all use a Samsung controller. Well, the P5 was Crucial's first consumer SSD that used their own controller design, which previously we've had Crucial drives in before, especially SATA drives, the MX500 being a fantastic example. But because they just used a Silicon Motion controller or a controller from Marvel for some of the earlier ones, it was a good drive, but it also came down to, well, if Mushkin can buy the same controller and then buy Micron Flash on it, what am I getting by buying it directly from Crucial? And there was plenty of valid reason for that. You got better support because they had longer warranties, or you knew for a fact that the endurance numbers were a little bit higher because they got first pack of their own, because they got first pick of their own NAND before binning it and selling it to someone else. And so there were still advantages there, but a lot of it just came down to cost. So using their own controller is a competitive advantage, even if there's a cost to doing so. And this means that they have their own Gen 4 PCIe controller. Although the timing's kind of weird. And I say that unironically, that they could have not released this, and it would have been fine. PCIe Gen 5 is, for consumer platforms, at least on the Intel side, probably about 6 months out. So unless this drive was basically already done and ready for production, if I was a person in management at any SSD manufacturer and I said, well, I haven't had a Gen 4 controller this long, I'm just going to skip it and go to Gen 5, that would be a reasonable decision to make when Gen 5 is going to be here, I'm going to say in about 6 months. Alder Lake appears to be coming with a Gen 5 controller, and unless there's something dramatically wrong with it, which there's room for a last minute change, it wouldn't be the first time a bug caused Intel to change product specifications shortly before launch. It would be even a greater competitive advantage to say, we're first out of the gate with a Gen 5 SSD. So, anyway, I'm not disappointed to see it. I am kind of disappointed that the name is just P5 Plus. I would have named it P6, P7, take your pick. Maybe those are already reserved for Gen 5 SSDs. Maybe 6 months, 12 months from now, the P5 Plus will be replaced by an SSD with a new name. I don't know. I don't have a whole ton of insight into how they make that particular set of decisions. Last but not least, Nexvu. I don't know if you remember the name Nexvu. We featured a device of theirs a couple of months ago at this point. It's actually been on my desk and working pretty well, even if I think parts of its feature set are missing. But you'll understand why if you watch the video on it. Sent me a press release this week on a new AI-powered smart, an AI-powered smart webcam. And this is ironic timing because I was just completing a project where I was playing with an AI-powered webcam. That particular camera, I did a little bit of an unboxing there. I haven't stitched it together in a way that I'm particularly happy with since I didn't get to do it in my studio. But that camera was the Ssdos Tiny. And it was a fun little device, but the AI features were a little bit lacking. And past about 15 feet, it failed to recognize my hand. Now, if you're not familiar with the Ssdos Tiny, you're supposed to be able to raise your hand to get it to lock onto your face and get it to track it, and then you can do another hand gesture to have it zoom in on you. And what I was finding is that if I zoomed in, walked to the end of the conference room, and then zoomed out, I couldn't zoom back in. And it had no manual override for making sure that it was looking at the entire conference table. So it was a cool idea, probably not quite appropriate for the room that it was being used in. The Nexvu camera, whose model number I'm going to put on the screen because I cannot remember it for the life of me, is a 4K AI-powered camera with an odd-looking feature set. And when I say odd, I mean it looks like they're bending the definitions of some of this. So they're calling it things like EPTZ and effective, which I assume means effective. And what it looks like they're actually doing is taking a larger than cent image. Maybe it's actually 6K on the sensor side, but it says it's 4K, and then cropping it down to present it as if it was physically turning. And that's not inherently a bad approach, and I've seen that from other conference cameras before. I've never seen one do it on a single large sensor, but another camera in the same class, there's a Jabra Camera, which there'll be a link to in the description, and it uses 3 independent sensors to give it a like 90, 140, and 270 degree field of view. And basically it will intelligently stitch together the picture from all 3 sensors and widen or narrow its field of view and then intelligently zoom in and out. So technically you can get a lot of the features you get out of a pan tilt zoom camera without that. But using a single large sensor is just not an approach I've seen before. It's got plenty of other features. It's built for classrooms. It has the ability to set up predefined zones that it will focus on, which is useful for things like blackboards, whiteboards, workbenches, that type of stuff. It also has a remote so that you can override what the AI is doing. And honestly, that is the feature that was missing from the Ssdos Tiny. The Tiny did a great job inside of about 10 to 15 feet, but I also had no ability to say, if you're looking at this side of the table, I want you to now go look at this person over here. Having a remote to manually tell the camera, no, I want you to go to zone 2, no, I want you to pan to the right, is a big deal. So anyway, that's what Nexvu sent in for us. I'm hoping to get my hands on one, no promises. I do have a couple of conference rooms I'd love to play with one in, though, and hopefully record something like this with one of those eventually. Pricing wise, I can't decide if they're pricing themselves out of the market or not. At $599, it is price competitive with the Jabra Elite, I think that's the name, Jabra Elite webcam, but it is above and beyond some of the proper pan tilt zoom cameras from companies like Ssdos. The Ssdos Tiny is $200. So depending on what kind of space you're using it in, well, small conference rooms, small classrooms, the Ssdos Tiny might actually be a better device AI issues notwithstanding. I mean, I can lock it on myself, walk over to the whiteboard, and then unlock it while I'm writing on the board easily enough. uh, but it also puts it underneath some of the Logitech pan tilt zooms, and it just kind of puts it in the middle of a lot of different devices. So I don't think it's overpriced, but I'm also not 100% sure that $599 is the right price for it either, considering that it appears to have some AI features in it and may require a decent amount of processing, especially if it's doing real-time downscaling from the image sensor. But it also doesn't appear to have, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe the camera does move, but it doesn't appear to have any actual servos in it or motion that has to be accounted for. All right. Anyway, as always, I want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing credits. I want to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, be it through our Amazon affiliate links or via Patreon. It is support like that that helps make videos like this possible. And finally, thank you for watching.